Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started because we have at least 25 people on the call, and then I'm sure others will join in as we get started. But first, I'll introduce myself. I'm Derek, and I work with Jumpstart, and this is our JUMPinar series, which takes place every other week or so. And they happen both in person at our office in Germantown and virtually here on Zoom webinar. And really, they're an opportunity for us to do a deep dive into specific topics in real estate development that we don't have time to cover in our official training program. So we've covered all sorts of things from construction to financing to leasing and property management. So there's a lot of recordings that you can find at jumpstartgermantown.com. And we're moving it to YouTube, so you can also find the recordings of all them on YouTube. But there's a lot of great recordings and a lot of great events coming up. So I definitely encourage you to check out the website jumpstartgermantown.com. And our Jumpstart co-op, Paula, can put that in the chat for you, so you can find the link easily there, as well as any other information that comes up tonight. But yeah, so our Jumpinar, we're going to spend the next hour talking with an expert in a specific topic here tonight, and that is financial preparedness for investing. And before I hand it over to our guest, Kenneth, I'm going to just quickly remind everybody that our Jumpstart Philly loan program is accepting loan applications, and we're ready to review your project. So if you've got a deal you want to get financed and you're looking for a hard money lender that is friendly for first time projects, definitely check out jumpstartphilly.com and apply for a loan. So that's my little housekeeping. Also a reminder, we have the Q&A section. So as questions come up tonight, be sure to enter them in the Q&A tab on Zoom, and then we'll address them all towards the end around 7:45 after Kenneth's presentation. So like I said, Kenneth is the lead financial advisor with the Burgman Financial Group, and he is here tonight to give a presentation on financial preparedness for investing. And I really appreciate this topic a lot because I get the question so much, like how much money do I need to start a project? How much capital I need? What needs to be in my bank account? And I understand that's the starting point, but there's a lot more behind that that you need to prepare for and think about. And it's not just, once you hit a certain dollar amount in your savings, you're ready to go on a project. That's part of it, but there's a lot more we need to take into consideration. And we met Kenneth here at an event in Germantown, and he took an interest in our JUMPinar series, and we definitely wanted to get him in front of you guys for his presentation. Just a quick disclaimer before I hand it over, we are going to be sharing all the emails of the attendees with Kenneth. For him to send out any follow-up materials. If you don't want your email to be shared, just shoot me an email, or write in the Q&A, and I'll mark that on your notes. But otherwise, we're going to be sharing the information. Just a heads up for some communication from Kenneth afterwards. Okay, that is my intro. Thank you, everybody. Kenneth, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you can start your presentation when you're ready. Thanks so much for being here.
All right, thanks a lot, Derek. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Happy to be here, and I love everything that Jumpstart is doing in Germantown, in Philly. So I'm happy to just be a part of everything that y'all are doing. So appreciate it. So I guess just to introduce myself a little bit here, and I'll share my screen. I am Kenneth Wilson. I use he, they pronouns, and as Derek had mentioned, I I'm a lead financial advisor for the Burgman Financial Group, which is a financial planning firm underneath the umbrella of Northwestern Mutual. So Northwestern Mutual is our parent company, but the Burgman Financial Group works within that. We're based out of Bucks County, Pennsylvania. We've got 3 advisors on our team, 3 team members as well who help us with some of the back end stuff. But we do full comprehensive financial planning, right? So whether our clients are business owners, real estate investors, individuals, families, we're helping them with just every aspect of their financial planning journey, from wherever they're at today, whatever pieces they have going on already. We're helping them to really look at, okay, where do you want to be in the next 5, 10, 30 years, and how can we help make that as efficient as possible and help get you there with the most predictable results possible. Okay, with that being said, today what we'll be talking about specifically is making sure that you're prepared for your next step in the journey of real estate investing, right? What does that look like? How do you make sure that you're doing that in a way that's smart and takes a way that's financially savvy, right? You want to do it in a way that's the most efficient possible and protects you both in the short term and in the long term. So that's kind of what we'll talk about today going into this. So what we'll cover today, making sure that we're avoiding the pitfalls of investing in real estate too early, right? As Derek was mentioning, a lot of people go into it with this whole, hey, as long as I have the down payment, I'm good to go. And we find that that is a big mistake and can be a big mistake for folks on the back end, right? It might be fine for you to get the property, but then what, right? Making sure that that all goes well afterwards is also a huge part of the real estate investing journey, right? So how do we make sure that that goes as well as possible? How do we make sure we have the right insurances to make sure that you're not only getting closer to financial security, but continuing to go towards financial security moving forward after that? And then in that same vein, how do we develop a strategy that makes sure that, yes, we hope everything goes well, but life also happens, and we are very aware of that. And I'm sure most of you are aware of that too in the real estate world. So we also want to have a good strategy for when things don't go well. And so what does that look like? That typically is going to look like building out a solid financial plan with a trusted partner, in this case, a financial planner or a financial advisor. So let's hop right into it here. As you all know, everyone wants to talk about investing. Everyone wants to talk about growing their dollars. And everyone, pretty much understands that volatility is a natural part of investing, right? And, we could be talking about investing into the, more traditional aspects, right? Investing into stocks and bonds and that kind of thing. But real estate is also a very volatile area of investment, right? And we want to make sure that we're prepared to do so in a smart way. And so, how do we create that? We want to make sure that we're also talking about the risks that we're taking when it comes to investing, right? So, when we know that there's the potential to gain money or the potential for gain, that means there's inherently a potential for loss as well. And so we want to make sure when our clients are going into an investment conversation or planning on making a large investment, we want to make sure that they're prepared for the risks that come along with that before they even start that investment. Because we want to make sure that when you do that investment, those upswings, those times when you're making money, we want all of that growth, all of that positive to reach your bottom line rather than have to make up for the mistakes or losses that we've had in the past. So, that comes along with number one, growing the wealth, right? Which is kind of that fun, sexy part of planning that everyone wants to talk about. But we also need to make sure we follow the back end too by protecting what matters, right? And so when we're looking at holistic planning and when we're preparing our clients to get ready for a jump like a real estate investment, we're looking at making sure that we have both sides covered, which I think is where a lot of people make mistakes. And so today we're going to be talking about how do we make sure we kind of cover some of those pitfalls or avoid some of those pitfalls and cover the areas that you're exposed to different amounts of risk. And what does that look like, right? So when you have a bunch of risk, there's kind of the obvious things that could be risks to your investment. Things like, oh, you get car insurance for if you get into a car accident, you get home insurance or homeowners insurance for a fire or a flood, right? Those kinds of things. What else could be affecting your long-term financial plan and, getting rid of some of that progress that you've made or some of the gains that you've made? Well, a lot of people don't think of this, but injury or illness, right? If you're not able to work, if you're not able to do what you typically do, are you still then able to bring in the income that you were before, right? With a lot of real estate investors, you're flipping a lot of these properties because you have the ability to make the improvements on a cheaper basis. You have the ability to, take care of some of these things that maybe your layman or your average Joe would have to pay someone to do, right? But if you can't physically do some of those things, how is that still happening, right? So we're talking to our clients about making sure we're covering all of these. So things like injuries and illness, disabilities, long-term care needs, right? What if you a family member or yourself needs to go to a nursing home, needs a nurse to come and take care of you, those kinds of things. And not for nothing, passing away is also something that will greatly affect your financial plan and those you're leaving behind, right? And so one of the things that we talk to our clients about is how do we make sure we're protecting your family or those that you're leaving behind from the financial impacts of your passing, right? It's while you might not physically be there anymore, there are financial goals, financial intentions that you had that you still probably want to be accomplished or you want those things to happen, even if you're not going to physically be there to see that come to fruition, right? And so we're talking to our clients about all of those things. Now, how does that relate to what you're doing as a financial or a real estate investor? It's, well, you're about to take on potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, right? And one of the things that we know is that that debt could take time to pay off. Hopefully, you're flipping a property and selling it, making a profit, and the debt is gone. But typically, the intent is then to do it again, right? And so you're always going to have some level of debt, whether it's your personal residence and the mortgage that's associated with that, or the current project that you're working on, or the next project, or whatever it is, right? And so we're wanting to make sure that any debts that you currently have outstanding are not going to then be passed on to your kids, to your spouse that you're leaving behind, or if nobody else is around, right, it could even go back up to your parents, right, when it comes to estate planning and how that all works. And so making sure that we're protecting against all of those things. And so when it comes to protection parts of the plan, we're wanting to make sure that we cover things that are going to be catastrophic to your overall situation, right? If you're out of work for a month or two, or sick or injured for a few weeks, that's not catastrophic, right? That's not a make or break type of situation. Typically, we're going to have an emergency fund to cover that. Our general rule of thumb is that we want that 4 to 6 months of expenses put away in that emergency fund. Now, that's a very personalized number, right? If you are spending $5 grand a month, you probably want somewhere between 20 and 30 grand put away. And that's specifically for emergency funds, right? So if you know you have a car purchase coming up, or you're purchasing a property soon, those dollar amounts that you're saving for those specific things are not included in that emergency fund. So that would be on top of that 30 grand. Let's say you want to put 20% down on a property, that might be another 60 grand that you have to have saved on top of that to put down on that property, right? And so we're making sure that we have both of those things, and the emergency fund is going to cover those short, smaller things, right? You're out of work for a month, you're out of work for 2 months, you've got, need to get new tires for the car, you got a medical expense, right? Those kinds of things. But what about bigger things, right? If you're going to be out of work for a year or 2 years, financially it's inefficient and doesn't really make sense for you to save 2 years worth of expenses into your savings account, right? We could grow your money in investments, right? All those different things. So we don't want to waste time with our cash in our bank account that much, right? And so we want to make sure that we have our income protected in other ways. And that's where disability insurance comes in. That's where having some coverage, usually through work, is going to play a role, but you also want to supplement that and make sure your full income is protected. So that's called disability income insurance. You want to make sure that you have as close to 100% of your income covered as possible, because if you're out of work, that doesn't mean you don't want to save. That doesn't mean you don't want to put away for retirement. That doesn't mean you don't have bills to pay for, right? Like your rent or your mortgage or whatever it is. And so making sure that that income is always coming in is going to be a huge part of the planning that we do. Okay. After that is then, okay, well, it's that passing, right? You passing is still a big risk that is not protected through disability insurance. That's going to be life insurance. And so, what does that look like? We'll talk about that in a second. But I think a lot of times when we're going through this conversation, people tend to have this mindset of like, okay, well, I'm a young, healthy individual, right? I've been taking care of myself. I've been doing the right things to do preventative care, things like that. Why would I need to protect my income? Why do I need the life insurance or all that stuff? I think in the real estate world, we don't have to have that conversation as often, because you understand there are risks that you're taking, right? You're taking out a mortgage. You know that mortgage could be short term, but there's the inherent risk of that staying, on your head and being something that you're responsible for long term. So it's making sure that we're protecting against the fact that that could be passed on to anybody else. Okay. The chances of you having a disability and not being able to work for an extended time are more likely to not be able to work for an extended time than to die sooner, right? And so we want to make sure that we're protecting against that risk since it's much larger. Okay. So what are the ways that you can be disabled, or what are the causes that cause a lot of folks to not be able to work? Well, it's much less things than maybe you would initially think, right? I think people tend to think of the standard like, oh, I got injured at work, or I got into a car accident or something like that. Those types of like drastic injuries are not as common as kind of the regular everyday, hey, you're out of work for mental instability or a mental health crisis, right? Or
I think the connection.
Okay, I wasn't sure if that was me or Kenneth. You're still there, Bella?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. We'll give it a minute or two. This never happens. Sorry, everybody. Just give us 1 or 2 minutes, and I'm sure Kenneth will hop back on here. All right, I'm gonna give him a call real quick. 1 second.
can you hear me?
Yep, I see you.
Sorry about that.
No worries. I wasn't sure if it was me or you for a second, so I'm glad we got to figure it out.
Okay, so let me share my screen again here. Apologize for that.
It's all good.
Okay,
It's all good. You're good.
can you, all right. So a lot of people tend to think of, kind of the reasons they might be out of work are just their, you know, uh, injured, they got hit by a car, right? Like these random things. They tend to be much more pedestrian reasons that people end up being out of work, right? Mental health issues. They got injured while playing, backyard volleyball with the family during the holidays, random things like that, as well as infectious diseases, cancers, digestive and heart issues, right? Those kinds of things. And so any of these reasons could be, any one of these could be the reason that you're out of work for an extended period. And so making sure that you have that protection and making sure that your income can still come in when any of these things happens is what's going to make sure that your financial plan stays solid. Okay. So that's one of the areas that we're making sure we're protecting against. Then we talk about, okay, well, what can we do now that we're making sure all this income is coming in, right? How do we make those dollars continue to work for us, right? It's paying off debts, including new real estate projects. It's paying off personal loans, student loans, mortgages, things like that. It's also continuing to save into the emergency fund. It's also setting up for short and long-term expenses or goals, right? So making sure that we can still put money towards that next property, can still put money towards retirement, and can still save towards growing the family and things like that, right? And so when you make sure that all of your dollars are growing continuously, and that you've taken out the risk of losing those dollars, now you have the ability to plan around what they're going to do in the future and can be efficient around those plans. Okay. Then the last thing is the life insurance, right? So making sure that we're leaving behind money for folks that uh, you are leaving behind. So whether that's family, a spouse, kids, it could be siblings, those kinds of things. We're making sure that you have life insurance to protect them. Okay. Now, life insurance, I think people tend to think of as if I pass away, my family gets some money, right? I think generally that is what it is. But there are multiple types of life insurance that you, as real estate investors, become more financially savvy, want to take advantage of.
I think we're losing connection again. You're muted.
Sorry, thanks, Bella. Sorry, everybody. Just give us a few minutes here. It seems like Kenneth is having a internet connection issue. Um, There we go. I got you back, Kenneth.
Of course, I have a great connection all day long.
Okay, it's all right. This happens quite a bit. Don't worry.
All right, so let's get back into this.
If he's sharing the presentation, maybe Derek sharing the presentation would help with the internet. Maybe it's
Maybe,
too.
yeah. If it happens again, we can switch to that. Yeah, cool.
All right,
I
you got
got you.
it back
Yep.
there? Okay. Good. So the main types of, or two main categories of life insurance would be term insurance and whole life. So these are essentially actually really comparable to how you might own real estate, right? So term, you want to think of like renting, right? You basically have it for a set period of time. During that time, you have coverage. If you're to pass away, someone's getting a check, right, for however much coverage you have. Now, this is a great option if you don't have a lot of income or if budget is really tight, you can get the most coverage for the lowest cost through term insurance. Now, the issue with that becomes typically term insurance is going to get more and more expensive as you get older, unless you have a level policy. But the bigger issue is that it ends at some point, and that end point might not be when you end. I think the big issue here is that when you have a term policy, uh, there's very little likelihood that it's going to pay out, right? If you have a policy that is through work, right, usually that's only going to be good for while you're working. And so typically we're going to retire and then pass away, right? So that policy is not paying out. You'll have a lot of other policies that are structured to last you until you're 80 years old or for 20 years or 30 years, right? Those types of policies a lot of people opt into because they're covering a mortgage or they're, protecting their income while their kids are getting ready for college, those kinds of things. But you still need final expenses covered when you pass away, even if you've paid off your mortgage, even if you've paid for your kids to go to school, right? All those things. And so a lot of times we're wanting some type of coverage to still be there, even when you're in your older age, even when you've covered a lot of things. And so that's where whole life tends to come in. Whole life is one of the types of permanent coverage, but the really nice thing about it is it works more like owning a home, right? And I don't need to tell you how owning a home works, but you get to build equity in that type of account where you can then access some of that equity while you're still living, right? And so a lot of our real estate clients love this because even though it's a long-term build, right, you're not going to probably use the cash in this type of account for maybe 15, 20 years, kind of like the equity in your property. But if you can either front load that or funnel extra dollars into there, you can grow these really quickly, and people will use them for things like down payments on properties or for funding a business or for sending their kids to college. There's a lot of flexibility here, and there's a lot of tax advantages, which I think is the bigger factor here, right? And so when we're talking to our clients about what's the right type of insurance, typically it's a combination of both, right? We're using the term insurance to make sure that we can get to the overall coverage amount that they need. And the whole life insurance is making sure that they have some growth built in, making sure they have some flexibility with how they can use these dollars, and making sure that there's going to be something there no matter when they need it. Okay. And so having the combination of both of these really makes sure that you have a well-rounded picture of not only if you were to pass what happens to your family or those you're leaving behind, but also while you're living, how can you make sure that you're being efficient with your dollars? So um, there's a lot of details that I'm definitely leaving out of talking about this type of coverage just because there's so much that we could get into. We could talk about this for hours. In fact, I have talked to clients for hours about these types of coverages. And so if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to us about these. But these are going to be one of the most important things to make sure you have before getting into the real estate investing world, because you want to make sure you have them before you've taken on the debt, before you have all this hanging over your head, because it's not a guarantee that you can get approved for these. So both of the types of insurances that we're talking about today, disability insurance, life insurance, both of those are going to be based on your age and your health, as far as how you can get approved for those. And so if you've had recent diagnoses, as far as health concerns, if you have recent surgeries, those types of things can disqualify you from getting these types of coverages. And so you want to make sure you have them sooner rather than later, just because the younger you are, the cheaper it's going to be, and the more efficient it's going to work for you over time. Okay. So one of the things that we're making sure we're talking to clients about is, hey, let's make sure that we have some of these coverages and really enough coverage for you to grow into for the rest of your life now in the beginning of when we're talking through planning, so that you don't have to really worry about it moving forward. Okay. Hopefully that makes some sense with all the interruptions. So let's move on here. So let's talk about growing wealth and the actual meat and potatoes of what people want to generally talk about, right? Which is, how do we then go from this protection phase of laying that foundation, building out that safety net, making sure that anything that we now build can stay built and continue to grow from there? What does that look like? So when we're going through the planning for our clients, everything is individualized, right? Like no two clients have the same goals, no two clients have the same history or current position. And so we want to make sure that the plans that we build have some level of flexibility, because we know that life changes optionality in all of our plans. And so what does that look like? We need to make sure we have an understanding of how much risk you're able to take, how much risk you're willing to take, how much risk you want to take over time, and then what are you able to do, right? So part of assessing how much risk you're able to take is, hey, do we have the right insurances in place? Do we have the right coverages? And do we have the emergency fund in place? Well, if you've been working with us, then you probably have that foundational stuff set up. So then we're moving on to the next part, right? Which is, how do we then continue to grow these? Risk side of planning, or making sure that we've laid that foundation, is part of why we have such success on the back end for the growth. Right? The growth that we get on the investments, the retirement, the estate planning side of things, all can stay there and continue to build on itself because we've protected against the things that could go wrong. So when it comes to then building, we want to funnel our dollars really into 4 different buckets at all times. And this is one of my favorite pages to talk with people. And I could spend 45 minutes just talking about this one page. And that's because when we're growing assets, we want to be funneling dollars into different buckets that are used for different timeframes in life. And the timeframes aren't like your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. It's not like decades like that. It's more current position moving forward into your future, right? And so if you take a look at these different buckets listed here, you've got the short term, which would be now to like 2-3 years out. You've got midterm, which would be 3 years out all the way to 10-15 years, depending on how old you are. There's long-term goals, right? Or the long-term bucket, which would be that 10-15 years out all the way to retirement, whenever your retirement age is. And then retirement itself, which is specifically typically designated at 59.5 or whatever your full retirement age is. Okay. So why do we split it up this way? Well, we split up the buckets this way because there are different tools and vehicles that you can use that are really geared towards and specially designed to give us the most benefits for those different time frames, right? And so if we think about the short term, for example, right, the short term would be things that we know are coming up as expenses in the next few months to a year. They're things that we don't know are coming up. So emergencies, things that were unexpected, would be kind of that right now, right? Because if we didn't know they were coming, when we find out is when they're happening, right? So all of that is going to be short term. So what are we going to use to pay for things that happen in the short term? It's going to be cash that we have in our bank account. It's going to be cash in the savings account. It's going to be the emergency fund that we had set aside, right? Those kinds of things. In there, I would also add just a high yield savings account, right? So the specific type of savings that you want to have is a high yield savings. We can talk about that later. But that's the short term. Now, the nice thing about the short term is that you have easy access to the money, right? It's readily available. You know it's going to be there. The bad thing about the short term is that, number one, there's no tax advantages. You're just taxed on it like any other dollars you normally have. But number two, these dollars are not growing for you, right? If you think of your savings account or your checking account or even a high yield savings account, the growth that you're getting in that account is not really anything to write home about, right? Especially a checking account, right? You're not earning anything on that. And a regular savings account, you might be earning 0.01, 0.02% interest, still practically nothing. And even a high yield savings account, if you're getting 4 or 5% interest on that, well, if we look at inflation, inflation was 7%, right? So we're still losing purchasing power in there. And so we don't want to funnel all of our money into savings. We don't want to funnel all of our money into the checking account because that's a waste of time with those dollars, right? Other than the emergency fund, those dollars should be working for you just like you're working for them. And so we look at some of these other buckets to then put some of those additional dollars to. Now, the caveat to that is if we know we have a major purchase coming up in the next 6 months to a year, that's also going to be in the short-term bucket, right? So if we know we have a project that we're working on or a property that we're going to close on soon, those dollars should all be in that short-term bucket. That should be in the savings because we're not looking to grow them over the next 5 years. We're looking to use them, okay? As we zoom out then and look at the next 3 to 10 years, that's where we start to invest. And this is going to be, when it says investment accounts, it's talking specifically about the more traditional investments, right? So mutual funds, stocks and bonds, or really mutual funds being a combo deal of stocks and bonds, right? And so the reason that we have that in that midterm bucket is because that's the time frame of we have the time to allow these accounts to grow. But it's not so short term that if the accounts do go down in the short term, we're not needing those dollars in that exact moment, right? And so the important part about investing in those traditional aspects is that the money can go up and it can go up really quickly, but it also can go down. And so we want to make sure that we have a long enough runway that if it does go down, we have time to rebound. We could get into a whole investment conversation around stocks and bonds and kind of traditional investment habits, but we just don't have time for that today. If you have more questions, reach out. But that is, we want to have a decent runway when it comes to investing into stocks and bonds. The tough thing about investments and the part that a lot of people don't think about is taxes, right? You are going to get destroyed on taxes if you are doing the typical invest into stocks, especially if you're day trading. But even if you're doing more long-term investment, you typically get 3 tax times on an investment, right? You're going to get taxed on your income when you get it. That's just income tax. You're going to get taxed on any dividends that get paid out to you while you hold the investment. Okay, so that's the tax on dividends. That's going to be taxed at your income level typically. And then on the back end, when you want to sell that investment and use the cash that you got, you're going to get taxed a third time. That's the capital gains, right? So you're going to, if you grew the dollars from 100 to 150, that $50 you're going to also then get taxed on, right? And so that triple tax on investments, not ideal. If we can grow dollars in similar ways, but pay way less in taxes, you're going to make more money, right? It's going to end up with you on the positive side. And so we want to make sure that we're being mindful of the amount of taxes we're putting in there, or the amount of taxes we're paying in that bucket. And that's also why we don't want to funnel all the rest of our money into that second bucket, right? I think a lot of times people are like, well, the options are save money into savings and cash or put it into the stock market, right? We'll be the first to let you know that you want to have some more options other than that, okay? The third bucket then is one of those options, which would be things like property, so real estate, right? Getting into the idea of, hey, let's grow equity in a property either in the long term, so over the next 10, 20, 30 years, or flipping properties over and over, right? Whichever way. Permanent life insurance is in that same bucket because it works the same way. We're growing equity over 15 or 20 years and then using that equity when the time comes to do whatever we need at that time. I like the idea of permanent life insurance here too, because you don't need necessarily the same amount of upfront cost that property might need, right? And so you're able to get started on that a lot sooner or in conjunction with other things that you're working on, for example, real estate investing. The other nice thing there is that there's a lot of tax advantages. So using the cash value in those permanent life insurance policies, you can borrow against it, use it as collateral, and in that way, you actually don't pay any taxes on the dollars that you're pulling out there. So there's a lot more to get into with how that bucket works and the specifics there. But the overall idea here is that we want to have dollars that specifically have been growing for 20, 25, 30 years, compounding on themselves in a way that allows them to be a large enough bucket in that 15 or 20 years that we can access them and they're substantial, but they also give us more benefits and advantages than some of those other buckets that were for the short term. Finally, we get into the retirement bucket.
Sorry,
Oh,
my microphone. Can you hear me now? I was just going to say a reminder for folks to enter their questions for Kenneth into the Q&A tab. We're going to have that in about 5 to 10 minutes once Kenneth has finished up the presentation. So just want to send a reminder there, and yeah, thanks.
So in this last bucket then is the retirement bucket. This is one that people tend to be a lot more familiar with, right? They understand that they have a 401k or the Roth IRA, right? Everybody wants a Roth IRA, which is a good tool. It's definitely a really good thing to have. But you want to do a few things with this last bucket, right? Number one, these dollars are typically going to be locked away until you're 59 and a half because of just the platform that you're using, right? If you're in a 401k, if you're in an IRA, those are structured so that if you pull out of those before you're 59 and a half, there's going to be penalties that you have to pay to the IRS. Okay. And so any dollars that we funnel into this bucket, we want to make sure we understand that we're not intending to touch them for at least that amount of years until we turn 60. Okay. That means that any dollars that we feel like we might need or might want to have access to, we should be putting in some of these other buckets. Okay. That also means that we shouldn't funnel too much money into here where we've locked away so much money that now we have to start bringing it back and paying a bunch of extra penalties and taxes that we wouldn't have had to pay otherwise. Okay. That also means we want to have the right ideas around which of these accounts we really want to take advantage of so we're not having to flip them around too many times. Okay. So a lot of times, if you're in a typical corporate job, a W-2 income, that kind of thing, you'll have a 401k and ideally a Roth 401k at that. And sometimes you'll have a match, all of that stuff. If you're not in a corporate environment or if you don't earn a salary, then that gets a little bit more complicated, right? You're going to have to create these retirement accounts on your own, whether that's through an IRA, a Roth IRA, opening up SEP IRAs, those kinds of business specific retirement accounts you can also set up. And I would say that you ideally want a few of these, and really in all of these buckets, the more options that you have within them, the more optionality you're going to have as life is happening. And so we'll talk about all of these things together when we're going through the plan, how they all intertwine, how they all work together, the tax advantages of all of those. So we can get into all of that another time. But essentially, what we're trying to create is this picture for you, right? You want to have multiple streams of income. You want to have multiple funnels that you're getting income from. So I know that this is a lot of stuff to look at one time. So just to give you some idea of what you're looking at here, this bottom funnel, this is that overall, how are you paying for your life? Okay. And it's labeled at the bottom as retirement income. That's just because that's when you'll have access to all of these funnels. But over your lifetime, you're actually going to have access to more and more of these funnels as you go. Right. And so if we go back to the last slide, the short term is where you're going to have access to those things in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. Once we get into the 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th year, right? It doesn't mean we're getting rid of our savings account or we're getting rid of our emergency fund. We're bringing that bucket with us into the next bucket, right? So now in the next 5, 8, 10 years, we have access to both our investments accounts and our cash and our emergency fund, right? Then when we get to 15, 20 years down the line, now we have access to all 3 of these first buckets, right? And that means in retirement, that's when we finally have access to everything. Okay. So what we're creating here for you is the ability to be strategic, where we say, hey, if life is happening and the government is changing regulations, they're changing tax laws, right? We always say tax laws written in pencil because it can be changed so often. But all of those things are changing at different points in your life, as well as your life is fluctuating, right? Whether it's because of health or because of family dynamic, you need access to different amounts of dollars in any given year. So where you get those dollars from is really going to matter in the long run, because it'll change how much taxes you pay in that year. It'll change how much of the overall account you get access to, right? Depending on which account it is. And it will change what you have the ability to do the following year or moving forward with whatever's left, right? And so there's all different aspects to where or why we want to choose where we're pulling that money. But for example, right, this top section of funnels, all of these funnels that you're looking at up here as far as income streams, these are all going to be tied to the stock market, right? So deferred annuities, those can be invested, non-qualified investments are invested, qualified investments, so those are going to be things designated for retirement, invested, right? And Roth accounts, Roth IRAs or 401ks, all tied to the stock market. So one of the kind of investing 101 rules is buy low, sell high, right? I'm sure many of us have heard that, especially in the real estate world, which means that if our investments are down with the stock market, we likely don't want to be pulling from them at that time, right? Ideally, we let those sit and come back to growth. And so if that's the case, we need a different bucket to pull from during that time, right? During the time when the market's down. So where can we pull money from? Well, if we look at the left side over here, all of these funnels are typically going to be fixed, right? So in retirement, your Social Security income, you don't get to choose how much Social Security income you get. It's just the same amount coming in every single month. Pensions, right? Most of us aren't going to have those, but if you do, it's again the same amount every single month. So you don't have any choice of how much you can pull from them. So where else can you pull dollars from that you do have a choice? Well, it's going to be things like your life insurance cash value. It's going to be like the equity in your property, right? Any cash reserve that you have, that's what you're going to pull from. And so during down markets, that's what we're recommending to clients. During times when the market's doing really great, that's a really great time to actually be taking money out of the market, right? Because now all of the things that we've invested into, they've grown, and that's that sell high part of time, right? So we probably want to be taking those dollars and splitting them into other assets or even other investments that are then going to grow more for us moving forward, right? And so it's just the ability to be strategic, the ability to have that optionality is really what gets you the most solid financial plan. And that's really the gist of it, right? If as you can get to intentionality, if you can get to optionality, then you have the most options and the most financial security. And so us on our team, that's what we do. That's what we create for our clients. So if you'd like to talk more about this, of course, this was super general, right? Very, first level, high level. But as we talk with our clients, the intention is to talk with you specifically about where you're at right now, what are you utilizing already, and then where do you want to go in the future, and how can we make that picture as cohesive as possible? Okay, so this is exactly what we do. We ask those questions. What's important to you? What's important to your loved ones? Where are you at today and where you want to go? And really create a solid financial plan for what that looks like for you. So with that being said, that's what I wanted to share today. If you have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. You can also get access to our specific scheduler link to schedule some time directly onto my calendar by using this QR code. And I know that there are some questions, so we can talk through some of them. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kenneth. That was wonderful. And yeah, I agree. It was pretty general, but it's like exposure, right? You just need to like hear all these terms and all these things, and that's how you can make better informed decisions down the line. And it's great to have somebody to come to when you're ready to talk the details of it. So thank you for giving us this presentation. It was wonderful, and I recommend everybody reach out and talk to Kenneth about what their plans are with their real estate investment, whether it's getting a loan from Jumpstart and doing a flip a year for the next 5 years, or whether it's buying a 30-unit apartment building and refinancing that. It's important all up and down that scale. So yeah, like Kenneth said, we'll send out his contact information. You can scan the QR code there. I do have a couple questions that I thought of as we were you going through your presentation there, and then there's one in the chat here, and hopefully a couple more will come in as we go. So I was curious about specifically, you mentioned the capital gains tax, and I know that most we'll assume that most jump starters are doing a single family flip, right, where they're like putting in maybe 150,000 and then selling the property for 250,000 and making X amount in profit. For somebody who maybe this is like their first project, or they don't have a big investment portfolio set up, can they expect to have to pay capital gains tax on that? And how can they kind of estimate what that would be?
Good question. So, capital gains tax, yeah, pretty much any type of investment or project that you could put your money into and let it sit, or have some time spent and then pull out more money, typically you're going to have capital gains taxes due there, right? And so there's a few things to think about here. When it comes to capital gains, there's a very big difference between short-term capital gains and long-term capital gains, right? And so anything that you've held for less than a year, or a year or less, is going to be considered short-term capital gains. Means that that's actually going to be taxed to you as income, right? So it would be as if you earned more income by whatever that gain was that year. So for example, right, in your example, right, if you put 150 into a house and then flipped it within a year, you just worked really fast and then sold it within that same year for 250, that 100 grand is like you earned an additional 100 grand on your income. So
Gotcha.
where our clients run into issues with that, right, is okay, well, if you're already earning maybe in your day job or maybe from your other projects, your annual income was already set to be 100 grand. Well, that 100 grand just bumped you into the next tax bracket, right? And so now we're paying more percentage on more dollars in this given year that we maybe didn't account for, right? And so you've got to be really aware of that. The other thing you want to think about is if you are close to that year mark when it comes to selling the property, does it make sense to just wait another month, or push that closing date out, or even just push the transaction itself to
That
the following year so that you can get long-term capital gains instead?
Yeah, and that was my next question, because I was thinking, Jumpstart's loan term is 12 months, and that payoff date is one date from when you start the project, and I think you're totally right. It could be in someone's interest to pay the extension fees for the 1 or extra 2 days, right? And deduct those taxes. But again, that's assuming that you're not the perfect rehabber and finishing your project within the in the first 6 months, right? So yeah,
I think the
that's
big thing there is you want to meet with an accountant, right? Ask them about like where that line is for what's worth it.
great. Awesome. All right, now I'm going to move on to Katrina's question here. She's asking about the fourth column on one of your slides a little earlier. I believe it was the retirement category on that one. So could you just briefly go over the differences between those 401k, IRA, annuities, and a Roth IRA?
Yeah, for sure. So 401k is typically going to be from that corporate job, right? So if you are an employee somewhere, a lot of times you'll have a 401k, but really it's just a naming thing that the government puts on it. So 401k, 403b, those are all going to be the same type of thing. It just depends on what type of company you work for. So if it's a corporation, it'll be a 401k. If it's a nonprofit or a government entity, it might be a 403b. If
Mhm.
it's the military, it might be a TSP. All of those are the same type of account, which is a retirement account that you invest for the long term and has special tax advantages. Okay. IRA is the same thing pretty much, but instead of getting it from the company that you work for, you're doing it on your own as an individual. So IRA stands for individual retirement account. That's just opened outside of your job. There are different requirements and limitations for how much you can put into those, and that just depends on the year that you're doing it. Annuities then are a little bit tougher to explain. Those are investment accounts that are typically locked away until you kind of flip a switch to turn them on. It's called annuitizing. When you annuitize, you get monthly payments or periodic payments for the rest of your life, essentially. So you can structure it so that kind of like if you had a pension, right? Where if you had a pension, you get payments from when you retire for however long you live. Annuities work in a similar way, where you get payments for the rest of your life. And then the Roth IRA is similar to the IRA in that you open it outside of work, but Roth, the definition of Roth, just means that the taxation that you're paying, you're going to pay taxes up front rather than on the back end. So I guess to give some context, all of these retirement accounts, some of the tax benefits that they have, instead of those triple taxes that you pay on normal investments, you pay either the front or the back end tax, but not all three. So Roth, you're paying the front end all those other ones, you're paying the back end tax.
Awesome.
Typically, we want the Roth because, you know, we're going to pay less in taxes now than in years.
Yeah, cool. Great, thank you. And that was all the questions we have. I'm surprised there's not more, but you know, maybe you'll get a lot of follow-ups afterwards. But thank you everybody for being here, and I'm going to leave it open for a few minutes here while I switch over to my slides. So just want to give a quick heads up for everybody for the next upcoming JUMPinars. They're all in person next month. So on the 10th, we're going to have one with sustainability and development with Nick Esposito, who's an expert in the topic. And then 2 weeks after that, we're going to have No Stupid Questions with Camille. And that's going to be, she's one of our new Jumpstart inspectors and a real estate developer expert who's going to, you know, open a no judgment environment for questions about real estate you might be too scared to ask, you know, which is silly. Never be too scared to ask, but this JUMPinar will be your environment to be amongst of other people who might not feel comfortable asking their questions. And then the next JUMPinar on May 5th or May 1st, sorry, is our Jumpstart Think Tank. And that's an event we've had, I think 3 or 4 of them now, and they've been awesome. They're just another town hall style Q&A with a couple experts in the room who can, you know, help you with specific issues you're facing in a real estate development project. And you can register for all those at jumpstartgermantown.com/events. And the links are all there for you to RSVP, and we'll see you when they happen. So that's all I got. Kenneth, thank you so much again. This was a really great, and I appreciate you taking the time tonight. And hope to see you around soon. And if not, we'll send out all your information for everybody tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye.
See you, Paula.